Our taxpayer money, apparently, doesn't really need to actually go to help people, according to our Congress. Welcome back to Wine and Chill. I'm Stephanie, your favorite recovering lawyer, and every month, once a month, sometimes twice, we discuss what's going on with the student loan payment pause and student loan forgiveness. Because I'm on my journey to pay off my six-figure student loans from law school. Yes, all right. So we're going to hop into it. Today's agenda is going to be what I paid in May. If you're new to this series, everything is retroactive. So yes, we are in June. Happy Pride. Everything will be what I paid last month. And then we're going to discuss the debt ceiling bill, particularly because there is something in that pesky bill that, affects student loan forgiveness, as well as millions of other people. And then we'll get into student loan forbearance updates, because those are very pertinent. And changes are going to happen August 29th. And those changes aren't exactly positive, which is why I'm wearing bright colors, to cheer it up. And then last but not least, we'll talk about student loan forgiveness updates and when we may be able to expect the opinion from SCOTUS. All right, so what I paid in May. So in May, keeping with the trend this year of paying $500 a month, it was $500 a month. It was $500 I paid in May. So my starting balance, if you're new, when I started paying off my student loans, February 14th, 2020, was $304,680.17 trifling cents, which I can never state this enough times. 75,000 of those dollars are simply predatory interest, aka money I did not borrow, which brings my remainder the beginning of June at $163,273.97 trifling cents, with my estimated total paid so far at $152,794.63 hard-earned pennies I've paid towards student loans in about 3.5 years. So yes, we've been, chugging along. I'm happy to report, since we are in mid-July, I finally have paid more than $500 this year, because I'm slowly getting back to my bigger payments, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. Not yet. My goal this month is just to pay $1,000. That's my goal. So I'm almost there. All right, let's talk about the debt ceiling bill. So, if you have been avoiding the news, I understand. It's usually dismal, but also the way in which our news channels deliver the news is very much blood pressure raising. So you may have heard about the debt ceiling bill. Every few years, America comes close to reaching its debt ceiling, and usually in a bipartisan effort, the debt ceiling is raised so we borrow more money, etc. It's nothing new. However, this year, many of the Congress members of the Republican Party decided that they wanted to play hardball with our taxpayer money, which is interesting. So they threatened to default on America's debt. And a default on America's debt would have numerous negative impacts, particularly on regular people, such as you and me. While a compromise was eventually reached, it's what has been included in this compromise that is largely the issue. Sadly, most of the programs that were cut were programs not to those with the most money, but to those that are the most underserved and the most marginalized in our community. So from the New York Times, the deal would suspend the $31.4 trillion borrowing limit until January 2025. It would cut federal spending by $1.5 trillion over a decade, according to the Congressional Budget Office, by effectively freezing some funding that had been projected to increase next year and then limiting spending to 1% growth in 2025, which is considered a cut because it would be lower than the level of inflation, which sounds well and good until you get into which programs were cut. The legislation would also impose stricter work requirements for food stamps, particularly for those that are above the age of 50. Lots of people that do need food stamps are also on disability or have lost their job due to unforeseen circumstances. Claw back some funding for the IRS enforcement and unspent coronavirus relief money, speed the permitting of new emergency projects, and officially end Mr. Biden's student loan repayment freeze. But hey, the defense spending increased. Oh, that's a loaded conversation, because y'all already know how I feel about the Ministry of War, which is what the Department of Defense used to be called. Yeah, our taxpayer money, apparently, doesn't really need to actually go to help people, according to our Congress. A sip. That last part is why we're here, because the student loan payment pause, which has been going on for 3 years, is officially and finally, sadly, coming to an end. Inside of the debt ceiling bill, there was language that stated the student loan payment pause would end 60 days after June 30th, which is August 29th. It is unclear when repayment will actually start, but the end of the payment pause is important because once the payment pause ends, interest begins. And interest is largely the issue. On top of the fact that the cost of education is so high, it is the interest rates and the compounding interest that keeps people in debt. In last month's video, we discussed a few quick steps that you could take if you haven't looked at your student loan balance in a while. That's okay. Take a deep breath. So the 2 steps we discussed were, first, finding out what your login is. I know plenty of people, they haven't logged in. If you are a recent graduate after 2020, you've most likely never logged into your student loan payments. Definitely call up the Department of Education, find out who your student loan service provider is. That is different from the Department of Education. Student loan service provider is usually a private company that is a contractor for the Department of Ed. So find out who your provider is. Also, your student loans may have been switched. I originally was under Fed loan that I was then transferred, aka sold off to Aid Advantage. Aid Advantage, honestly, they haven't completely irritated me yet. However, the user interface is just not as nice as Fed loan. I'm just saying. So once you find your login, you're then going to see what the heck your minimum payment is and write that in your budget. So that way it's not a surprise to you come August 29th, August 30th, whenever we actually get kicked into repayment. And then we're going to add a 3rd step today, which is math. I love math. Just kidding. I really can't. Just kidding. If you've been on this channel long enough, you know I detest math. I hate math. Math is not my ministry, but money is. So we're going to do a little bit of math because you need to calculate your interest. The biggest issue with student loans outside of the exorbitant cost of education is interest. The interest rates are in general too high. So NerdWallet gave us the foundation for some math, and I've done the math on my student loans to use it as an example. So essentially what you're going to do is you're going to do this math calculation. Your student loan interest rate divided by 365 days, that's the amount of days in the year. You're going to multiply that amount by your outstanding loan balance, then take that entire amount that you get times 30, and that will give you your monthly interest, how much you're paying every month in monthly interest. If you have multiple student loans, which I do, you're going to have to, you could technically do this for each student loan and then get the number, or you can do a little shortcuts and then just take the average of your student loan interest rates. So I have 3 remaining student loans, so that's how you see 7.21, 6.84, 6.41, very high. And then the average of those 3 student loans was 6.82%. So that's the math that I use to do mine. So my daily interest right now with today's numbers is $28.09. $28.09 of what? Money I did not borrow. That's every day. Yeah. Okay, so that means the monthly payment would be of just the interest, if I just were to pay the interest, $842.70.
I said, damn, bitch.
You'll see in my little cutout, my student loan minimum payment, which this hasn't been in effect for 3 years, is $156.93. It's so low for one main reason, because I'm on income-based repayment, and income-based repayment is based off of how much you made the year prior. This is my pre-big lawyer in tech money. This 156 is based off of when the first time I made $100,000. For that job, I made $105,000. That's what that's based off of. And you know what? I have mixed feelings on whether or not I should have proactively updated it, which according to the income-based repayment program, the way it works is you only have to update your salary once a year. So when I finally did make an actual competitive salary of $150,000, I wasn't required to update it in that year, and then the pandemic happened. So it never changed it. By not updating it, I had a lower monthly payment, technically, even though, let's put payment pause aside. However, a lower monthly payment simply means your interest is still accruing. So it doesn't really help you in the long run. Something to keep in mind. Now, you'll see on mine, I have 2 hypothetical scenarios. If I refinance my loans at 4.9%, instead of paying $842 a month in interest, I'll pay $657 in interest. And if I refinance at 3.5%, no student loan refinancing provider currently right now is giving anything at 3.5%, but I have really good credit. So maybe, I put a dream scenario in there. Then the monthly interest would go from $842 to $469. So you can see why refinancing is very helpful. There are a lot of pros and cons. And honestly, until they affirmatively push us back into repayment, we're not going to talk about it yet because that's a lot of things to add to your stress level. But something for you to keep in mind, whether or not you want to refinance with a private company. Not to do now, but just something to keep in mind as the SCOTUS opinion is most likely coming out this week or next week, and then student loan payment pause is officially ending August 29th. So with refinancing, one thing to know, I did refinance one of my student loans 2 weeks before the first payment pause started because I'm not a fortune teller. How is anybody going to know? And the process is pretty quick. The downsides, just to get into it for a second, of student loan refinancing is you don't have federal protections. So if you refinance before the pause ended, your loans most likely didn't go on pause. A lot of the private lenders, if you refinance with them, they did allow for some forbearance just to be competitive. But overall, they don't have the same protections. So things to keep in mind. Now that we know the pause is ending and you know how to calculate your student loan interest, calculating the student loan interest, to be honest, it's going to raise your blood pressure. Every time I do it, it raises my blood pressure.
I'm tired of suffering. I'm tired of suffering.
But it does kind of light a fire under my behind, like, oh, I need to start making these payments a little bit more than $500. I need to get back to my large, big money payment because that's the only way I'm going to pay this off. There are going to be changes to the income-driven repayment plan, income-based repayment. They're one and the same. Those likely are not going to go into effect till 2024. So keep them in mind. However, none of the changes to IBR actually change your interest rate. And that's the problem. So the proposed changes, just so you're aware of what's coming up, the proposed changes state that instead of your interest accruing every month and then tacking on to your balance, if you do not pay the entire, so for mine, it would be $842.70 in interest. If I were not able to make a payment, that is $842.70 trifling cents, and I only pay $500, that extra $342.70 trifling cents will not then be added on to my balance, which is great. That's helpful. However, if I continuously pay only $500 and I never pay $842.70, I will never touch the principal. That's basic math. And that's my issue with these suggested proposed changes to income-based repayment, income-driven repayment. It doesn't actually help people in the long run, because in the long run, the goal is to not have the debt, to not have the thing choking you, keeping you up at night, stressing you the hell out. So let's go to student loan forgiveness updates. So student loan forgiveness, as you all are aware, we've been tracking the 2 Supreme Court cases, which are in review by SCOTUS. And the way SCOTUS releases opinions, they do so usually once or twice a week. So the next available date for them to release the opinion is June 15th, this Thursday. I'm filming this on Monday, so hopefully this video will come out before then. But it is likely that they are going to release their opinion on student loan forgiveness and whether or not student loan forgiveness can move forward. I've said this before, unfortunately, I don't think it's likely that they push forward and allow student loan forgiveness. It would be wonderful if they did. There are legal grounds for student loan forgiveness to continue forward and for people to have their debt forgiven. It is very much legal. The arguments put forward, which we discussed in a live stream many moons ago when the original oral arguments were put forward against student loan forgiveness, they're nonsensical. They're not good legal arguments. Essentially, the US, unfortunately, has politicized an issue that didn't need to be political in the first place, which is most younger people have student loans. It does not benefit the economy for all of us to be saddled with debt. As somebody who does not qualify for student loan forgiveness, I'm still very much in favor of student loan forgiveness for other people because it doesn't make sense, particularly in the fact that we are likely, if not in the recession, facing a recession, and it's upcoming. It depends on which economist you ask whether or not we're in a recession, so I stopped listening to them. I am counting the recession by the cost of grapes, and I would like y'all to know that the grapes are still $10. And I feel a way. I feel a way that the cost of grapes is still $10. And I appreciate all of y'all for sending me that very funny Instagram of the woman also complaining that the cost of grapes are $10 and that her 3 children eat them in one sitting. I don't have an excuse as to why our grapes disappear so fast, except Gabriel eats them. So you know what? It is what it is. All right, the minute that SCOTUS releases the opinion about student loan forgiveness, we will go ahead and have a live stream about that, talking through the opinion and the effects and what likely is going to happen. It should be noted, and something that I've been seeing a lot of student loan debt advocates and student loan forgiveness advocates stating, many of the student loan service providers, FedLoan, which FedLoan no longer does student loans anymore, they're currently offloading all the students and people that were in their system. Advantage, Nelnet. Child, I'm like, who am I missing? Oh, I'm missing Navient. I was like, what's the most awful one? Navient, Sally Mae, etc. A lot of these corporations, due to the pandemic, laid off large amounts of their staff. It is unlikely that they're going to be able to start collecting our money on August 30th, but it is a possibility. So that is something that we'll keep track of as we continue on, because knowing when your payment is exactly due, I know is very helpful. So in the meantime, deep breath. It's gonna be what it's gonna be. Unfortunately, that's kind of how I feel about my student loans. So at the end, I always say like how I'm feeling about having paid off $150K in 3 years. And after doing the math, I'm not gonna lie, after doing the math on my interest, that kind of stressed me out. But it did in a positive way. My goal is to be done. I don't want to pay these for the rest of my life. I don't want to be 65 and still have these damn student loans. I'm tired of them. They stress me out. It's annoying. And then the other half of it is some days I really don't think about them, to be honest. And I think that's because I have a plan. I think having the plan is just kind of on autopilot. Like, I made the payment, it is what it is. But that plan is contingent on me making bigger payments like I used to. So I'm gonna need to do some shifting. Yes. Well, on that note, we're going to do a full deep dive into the debt ceiling bill and what exactly is being cut and why. And we're going to discuss the debt ceiling bill over on Instagram, and all the Instagram lives get saved to Patreon. And we're specifically going to discuss why it's grossly inappropriate, but also kind of shows a mirror about how America feels about its citizens, in that cutting programs to the people most in need is somehow seen as progress. Instead of cutting the large, inappropriate, exorbitant, nobody knows where all that money is going, defense fund. Defense fund. On that note, I'll catch y'all in the next video.